Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Francesco Di Lillo, here with Derek Munson, and on behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Sutherland Institute, we are delighted to welcome you to the first webinar of our Strengthening Families webinar series titled Families in Transition, Navigating Modern Challenges. It is wonderful to see so many of you joining us today, and I'm excited about these insightful discussions we are going to have. This series aims to bring together experts, scholars, and practitioners from various fields to explore and share knowledge on the impact of new policies and laws on families and family dynamics. We believe that through these webinars, we can generate innovative ideas that will contribute to the strengthening of families through effective policymaking. We would like to extend our gratitude to our speakers for their time and efforts in preparing their presentations, and we also want to thank all of you for being with us today. Derek.
Thank you, Francesco. I am Derek Monson, Chief Growth Officer with Sutherland Institute. And with Francesco, welcome everybody to this webinar on strengthening families. With us today, we'll give brief introductions. We have Matteo Rizzoli, who is Professor of Economic Policy at LUMSA University. Angela Riccitti is a Senior Fellow and the Rowe Scholar in Opportunity and Mobility Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Brad Wilcox, who's the Melville Foundation, Jefferson Scholars Foundation, University Professor of Sociology and Director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia. And Madlir Mehma, who is the Head of Program for Artificial Intelligence and Global Governance at the Global Governance Institute, and also Professor of International Relations at Brigham Young University, Idaho.
So we have a very exciting panel with speakers that will address complementary topics. And we will start with the first remarks from each of them of about 5 minutes, and then we will follow with a series of questions, and finally we will open the floor to questions from our participants. So please familiarize with the Q&A tool that you see on the Zoom client, and feel free to submit questions anytime for our speakers. Well, we will start with Professor Madlir Mehma. He will address technology and the family and discuss how the ubiquity of social media, smartphones, and AI is impacting and changing family formation and stability, in particular through its impact on mental health and forming relationships. Professor Mehma, the floor is yours.
Grazie, Francesco. Thank you to everyone, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. It is an honor to speak with you today about a subject that is both deeply personal and profoundly, of course, societal: the impact of artificial intelligence, social media, and technology on families and individuals. I must admit the nature of the topic is such that today I approach it not only from an academic perspective, but also from a place of concern and, of course, responsibility. Technology in its many forms has changed the way we communicate, learn, work, and even form relationships. But while the conveniences it offers are undeniable, witness today's webinar, for example, we must also examine the unintended and, dare I say, intended consequences of their uses. Now, the question is, how do AI and social media shape our mental well-being? How do they influence family stability, personal identity, and social cohesion? And most importantly, how can we harness these tools responsibly? And I argue that perhaps it's best to start with some definitions, because we use this term interchangeably, but not necessarily the same. First, with social media, we refer to it as digital platforms, the ones that we're most familiar with, of course, that facilitate online interaction, content sharing, and networking, such as Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Internet technologies, of course, encompass the broader digital infrastructure that enables these platforms to function, including cloud computing, data storage, and network protocols. Now, AI is one that we hear a lot about, and in many ways precedes and predates many of these developments, at least theoretically. And so, for our purpose at least, the way we define is a subset of technology that enables machines to simulate, and I think it's an important term there, human intelligence, processing vast amounts of data to make predictions and automate decision-making. AI is increasingly embedded within social media and internet technologies, shaping user experiences through personalized recommendations, automated moderation, and algorithm-driven content curation. And unlike traditional internet technologies, which serve as passive conduits for information, AI actively interprets, predicts, and influences human behavior, often blurring the line between assistance and manipulation. Understanding then the interaction between these three elements is key to assessing the broader impact on families and individuals and really society at large. So, building on this, the interplay between AI, social media, and internet technologies has created an ecosystem where digital technologies and interactions are increasingly personalized, yet also more susceptible to ethical concerns, which is what brings us here actually today. So, AI driven algorithms dictate much of what individuals see online, from news articles to advertisements, perhaps even the ad to this particular platform and this event, often reinforcing pre existing beliefs and creating echo chambers. And this phenomenon, of course, has, in my view at least, significant implications for families and individuals as it shapes their perceptions of reality, influences decision making, and in some cases exacerbates family and social polarization. Moreover, AI powered content moderation and recommendation systems operate with and within opaque decision making processes, raising concerns about bias, censorship, and the manipulation of public discourse. While AI enhances efficiency and engagement, it also introduces risks related to digital dependency, privacy erosion, and the commodification of human attention that hopefully we can talk about more in the Q&A session. As AI continues to evolve within the digital landscape, understanding its mechanisms and implications becomes critical, I think, for fostering informed and responsible technology use. On mental health and well-being, a few words. So the rise of social media and smartphone technology has coincided with an alarming increase in mental health concerns, particularly among young people. I hope we can explore this a little bit later because I do have some concerns. I use the term here coincide. I think there's a lot of correlation. I am not quite clear yet on the causation. There is a lot of research, however, that highlights this, that since the early 2010s, with the emergence of these new technologies, especially with the iPhones, smartphones, rates of depression, anxiety, and self-harm among adolescents in in the global north especially, have surged. The suicide rate among 10 to 19-year-olds has increased by 48% just in the last decade. And then you add to that AI-driven social media algorithms, albeit a more recent addition to this dynamic, has also played a role in the crisis. These systems, as I note, are designed to maximize engagements by exploiting psychological vulnerabilities, keeping users hooked on endless scrolling. Studies have actually shown that constant exposure to curated online personas fosters unrealistic self-comparisons, leading to lower self-esteem and increased anxiety. At the same time, AI is also being leveraged for good. AI-powered mental health applications actually provide, even though just in the early stages, accessible support, offering early detection of anxiety and depression. A recent RAND Corporation study, for example, found that AI-driven tools can assess appropriate responses to suicidal thoughts at a level comparable to trained clinicians. However, the same study also cautions that more studies are important and necessary. However, while these approaches are promising, they raise ethical concerns regarding privacy, data security, and the loss of human empathy in the therapeutic interactions. AI-driven mental health tools rely on vast data sets, often sourced from user interactions, to refine their diagnostic accuracy and therapeutic recommendations. And these, of course, raise the issue, as I said, of data privacy. Who has access to the information and how can it be securely stored? Additionally, while AI can recognize patterns in speech and behavior to flag potential mental health crisis, it lacks the human intuition necessary to provide emotional support and genuine empathy. Moreover, excessive reliance on AI-based therapy could diminish the availability of human-led mental health care as we invest in AI rather than actually in humans to provide this. This leads to dehumanization of support systems. Now, a few words on family before I close. Technology is increasingly mediating family interactions. All of us, I'm sure, have experienced this. We don't need me telling us that, in fact, smart home devices now can help streamline household tasks, while AI-driven educational tools at least hold out the promise, we're not quite there yet, by providing personalized learning experiences for children and adults likewise. On one level, this allows families to be more efficient, more organized. If we can outsource tasks, that's for the better. But there are risks, since over-reliance on AI in parenting can lead to a reduction in meaningful human interactions. The Vatican's actually recent document on AI, just in January of this year, Antiqua Nova, warns the potential erosion of human dignity when AI is allowed to replace authentic human relationships. It urges families to use technology as a supplement rather than a substitute for parental engagement and human engagement, just generally speaking. So beyond concerns about authentic relationships, screen addiction, as I mentioned earlier, is another growing concern for families. The European Commission and multiple research institutions have actually found that excessive screen time, particularly among children, I'd argue adults as well, can hinder cognitive development, disrupt sleep cycles, and contribute to attention disorder. So researchers then have found that children and teens who are exposed to AI-driven recommendation systems at an early age often develop higher levels of compulsive behavior. Concerns about children, thankfully, have actually spurred governments and agencies to act. In Greece, for example, the government has proposed a kids wallet. It's an app. And then, of course, the EU's Digital Services Act has sought to enforce stricter age verification standards. And there's more coming down the pipeline from the EU. And normally, because of Brussels effect, they may actually affect standards throughout the world in this direction. One of the more controversial developments, of course, is the emergence of AI-driven companions, and this affects families and individuals and mental health being. A survey from the Institute for Family Studies found that 25% of young adults believe AI could replace, they believe this, right? That they are okay with it, could replace real-life romantic relationships, and 10% are actually themselves open to AI friendships. This trend, of course, raises profound questions. Are we developing a preference for digital interactions over real human relationships? If so, what does this mean for emotional development, social skills, and long-term relationship stability? Elder David Bednar of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has warned about the dangers of pseudo-intimacy relationships, where AI-driven emotional engagement provides the illusion of companionship while undermining authentic human connection. He likens the effect to carbon monoxide, a silent but lethal killer of deep, meaningful relationships. Additionally, recent studies point, addition to what I mentioned earlier, to some other concerning developments regarding AI relationships. While only 1% of young adults currently have an AI friend, 10%, like I said, are open to the idea. Men are more likely than women to believe in AI's potential to replace human romantic partners, 28 to 22%. Heavy pornography users are more open to AI romantic relationships and friendships, suggesting a correlation between certain online behaviors and acceptance of AI companions. And finally, young adults from intact families are less comfortable with AI romantic relationships than others. The good news is that 80% in the US, at least, of teenagers still consider it crucial for lawmakers to address AI risks. And also, despite technological advancement, skepticism about AI's ability to replicate human and genuine human connections remain high. Clearly, AI and digital technologies are transforming our lives in profound ways, but how do we ensure that these tools enhance rather than erode our relationship and well-being? And of course, to answer this, we must examine both the benefits and risks of AI presented across different aspects of life. My time has run out. I have other remarks, and I'm sure that during Q&A, I can address the rest of it. So with that, I'll cede the time back to you, Francesco. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Mema. We look forward to those questions and further discussion. Next, we'll go to Angela Riccitti with American Enterprise Institute.
Thank you. Thank you, Francesco, and thank you, Derek, for having me here this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. So I have spent my career studying low-income families, studying poverty in the U.S., and I primarily focus my research on the social safety net in the U.S. and government programs to try to alleviate material hardship as well as other challenges that low-income families face. And so I wanted to just, open up my remarks, trying to provide some context for what challenges these families face, as well as the government response to try to address some of these challenges. So in the U.S., I would argue that the social safety net is large and robust, but it is certainly designed in a way that sometimes can mask that robustness because it's very different than what we see in European countries. For example, the federal government operates and funds over 80 programs targeting low-income families or households in the United States. But in many ways, if you think about what families need when they lack income, you would think income support. The government should transfer income to households to help alleviate those challenges. But in the U.S., the way the social safety net has evolved really over the last century has been a combination of income support type programs where cash is transferred to households, as well as other ways, what we call in-kind benefits, where the assistance that is provided in a restricted manner, such as providing health insurance or providing assistance that can only be provided or only be used for food. And some of the way the safety net has evolved has really happened because of this tension that policymakers often face. On one hand, wanting to provide for families so that they can achieve success, provide for their material needs, and on the other hand, not wanting to undermine their ability to provide for their own self-sufficiency. And so if you think about it in that way, the way the safety net has evolved in the U.S. makes a little bit more sense because there is always this tension around not wanting to undermine employment, for example, because employment is crucial to helping families escape poverty and move up the income ladder. There's this tension in not wanting to undermine the formation of two-parent families because we know that two-parent families not only lead to more economic success just because you have the availability of two potential earners, but also can provide more stability for children who have access to two parents. So there's always this tension in developing policies, like I said, on the one hand, trying to provide for that material support, while on the other hand, trying to not undermine the very things that can help families get ahead. And so what the result then is we do have kind of a mix of various programs, and policymakers and scholars like myself really try to analyze and study how all of these different factors fit together and what policymakers can do to try to address these tensions. And I'll just give two quick examples and kind of, I think, illustrates the difficulties in trying to design programs that help low-income families while also not undermining these tensions that I described. If you just think of the two kind of largest income support programs in the United States, one is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's basically the largest food assistance program in the U.S. It is income support that's provided to households, but it can only be used for food. And then we also have the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is cash that is sent to households, but it's only available to families who are working. So these benefits together for a working household can provide up to $10,000 if you have a single parent with two children per year. Which is fairly comparable to how families can receive in other countries if you do some parity adjustments. So when you think about these two programs, the inherent tension, however, is that by providing income support in this way, on the SNAP side, it can undermine employment because assistance provided through SNAP can replace the need for work when income support is coming from the government. But on the other side, the Earned Income Tax Credit is only available to working families. And so the kind of the requirement for households to navigate these two different programs that have these competing interests can be very challenging. And in the same respect, it can have effects on the formation of two-parent families in terms of as income increases in a household, they either see a reduction in their benefits or they can become not eligible for these programs at all, meaning that if a single mother, for example, decides to get married, the income from that second person can actually make that household ineligible for these benefit programs, and therefore that can disincentivize marriage and disincentivize partner formation. So again, these kind of tensions are inherent in almost all of the federal programs available to U.S. Low-income families, and certainly something that policymakers have in mind, but in many ways can actually increase economic stability for families. At the same time, they are trying to reduce economic instability and help families achieve long-term success. So I will end there, and hopefully we can have a discussion, and as well as I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashidi, for your remarks. Now the floor to Professor Matteo Rizzoli from LUMSA University from Rome, Italy.
Thank you for this invitation. I'm very excited to be here with you and with these colleagues. So I'm talking to you from Italy. Italy is the frontier of the new brave world of low fertility, as you might know. I mean, it's a word that is becoming very common nowadays. Fertility, high fertility is basically an issue confined to some parts of Africa, not even all of Africa. Most of the world confront new challenges, and Italy is on the frontier of that. We have been on low fertility since 1976. That was the first year that the fertility rate fell below the level of 2 children per couple. So next year is going to be 50 years. This has already provoked consequences. To begin with, we have been on population decline for a few years now, even if migration is still positive, not huge, but still we have a net inflow of migrants, and still yet we are on population decline. This has produced all sorts of consequences. Is producing all sorts of consequences. Italy has been on a stagnating level of GDP for the best of the last 20-25 years. I mean, it's very difficult to grow aggregate product when you have a declining population. But even GDP per capita has been stagnant. Has been stagnant because, there's all sorts of problem in the type of economy we have. The industrial output is going down. Innovation mostly due to firms closing, not necessarily due to international competition. Many times it happens that simply they don't find people who bring on the company itself. Very low in innovation that might be linked to the increasing age and low levels of young innovators among the population. Of course, this implies all sorts of problems for the public finances, as you might understand. It's very difficult to curb the public debt if the GDP doesn't grow. Pensions now account for 16% of GDP. And so on. So there's all sorts of social and economic ramifications of this state of affairs that concerns the low fertility. Do we discuss about this issue here? Well, to some extent, not as much as we should. I think we are like in an emergency but the politicians seems not to realize that for some reason. Maybe it's just a problem too big to see. Anyway, so it's not that there's no discussion. Of course, I'm beyond my academic work. I do a lot of work with family associations and some family policy organizations. And so much of the debate we are having is focused on the marginal, what I call the marginal cost perspective. So the idea is that if we have this state of affairs, it's because raising kids is too costly for a variety of reasons. Maybe we can catch up on that later on. But there is an issue that I see rising that is really worrying me. So it's not only that young people would like to have kids, but they cannot afford. That might be part of the story, or it was probably most of the story for a long time. I see growingly another explanation raising, which is that in fact, after all, this decline is not bad after all. Actually, there are emerging arguments suggesting that population declines is not negative, in fact. So there are movements, antinatalist movements, raising very fast. Well, I mean, these natalist movements are local, but also international. If you just take a chance to go online and check the Stop Having Kids, Google that, and you will see a website, a very interesting website with that shows you what these anti-natalist movements look like. So what are the reasons they raise that that change the attitude of individuals that see in the choice of not having kids a good thing? Well, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons we can raise, but of course, among them there is also the environmental considerations. There is eco-anxiety, environmental anxiety, that is really taking a toll. I recently saw last week there's an outlet that I'm connected with that made a focus group with young adults like between 18 and 25, so just before or on the edge of forming families, and they were asking them about do you intend to have kids, and most of them said no. And when they asked them what was the reason why not, and I mean the primary reason, the top reason for them was about the environmental anxiety. The only second to that came the usual sucks, was job insecurity, challenges in balancing family and work life, and so more common or more traditional explanations for the resistance to have kids. So this is where I'm speaking from, the place where I'm bringing my my contribution to the debate today. So I'm here to discuss with you further. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Professor Rizzoli. To conclude the remarks portion of the webinar, we'll turn to Brad Wilcox with the Institute for Family Studies at the University of Virginia.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks, Francesca, for having me here today. I wanted just to kind of begin my remarks by talking about the way in which changing technologies, we think at the Institute for Family Studies will be, potentially injecting another note of economic instability into our societies today in ways that will be, problematic for family formation and stability. So the kind of opening point here is just to note that many of the champions, many of the executives who are kind of advancing AI are arguing that AI will kind of seriously disrupt the job market. And we think, based in part, of course, on our experience with the China trade shock, a few decades ago, that such disruptions will have a strong impact on family life in America. And again, that's in part because work is so fundamental to family formation and family stability. And what we've seen, for instance, in research from Harvard is that men who are not working full time are 36% more likely to get divorced compared to their peers who have full-time work. And so if AI is going to be kind of entering into the contemporary economy and being disruptive, we think that will be kind of consequential in clear ways. We also have been doing some work lately on the links between kind of the character of work and family formation by class. And what we're kind of seeing in this new work is that, back in 1980, working class men actually had higher family formation rates than college educated men, more educated, more affluent men. At that point in time, 58% of prime age working class men were married with kids versus 55% of college educated men. But as I think many of us know, since then, family formation rates have really declined, especially among working class men over the past 40 years. Today, just 34% of prime age working class men are married with kids versus 44% for college educated men. And our work suggests that a lot of these differences now that have emerged can be traced to the fact that working class men have jobs that are less remunerative, they are less stable, and they offer less benefits. And these different job features or job characteristics explain about 80% of the difference between working class and college educated family formation rates. So what's been happening in the US then, from our perspective, is that, changes in sort of the character of work for less educated men, changes that have been driven by shifts from a manufacturing to an information service economy, have created a newer kind of job context where working class men are less able to kind of gain access to higher paying and higher quality work. And that in turn is one of the factors that accounts for their lower rates of marriage and family formation. And our concern here as we go forward with AI, that AI's ability to kind of hollow out white collar work will lead to many American adults kind of losing their jobs or losing, access to higher paying and higher quality jobs, and that they too will then face, down the road, lower rates of marriage and lower rates of family formation as a consequence of this economic shift. In fact, just even today, the New York Times had a piece about the uptick of unemployment among white-collar workers that might be related in part to AI advances. So again, we're just kind of basically saying that we've seen some major shifts in American life economically away from manufacturing towards mission service sector jobs that have ended up playing a role, we think, in undercutting the formation of and the stability of working class marriages and families. And so our concern as we go forward is kind of that AI may play a similar role in undercutting the formation of married and stable families in more white collar sectors of our society here in the US and probably obviously in other parts of the world as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This has been a very interesting initial round from all of you. And let's start with the questions. Derek, I do have a question for Professor Mehman. When he talked about, the picture that you drew about AI and the impact that it's having on families is quite gloomy. But I wanted to ask you a mix between social media and AI. How is the ubiquity of social media, smartphone has impacted, in your opinion, the formation and stability of families? And if you could dig a little deeper on the implications of these technologies and AI in particular on the mental health and relationships within families, because that was the worrying part of your initial contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. Well, to be honest with you, we don't really need, and we do have it, but we don't need a lot of scientific evidence. We can see this all around us. We can see it in our own families. We can see it individually. We can see that there is this correlation, at least in the global north. And I want to emphasize that because those patterns are not widespread everywhere. There is certainly a pattern. Of course, Jonathan Haidt has come up with a fascinating research recently, evidencing exactly this kinds of development. Yeah, and there is a correlation. There is a relationship between the ubiquity of technology, so with smartphones in particular, and that is of course connected then to immersion of social media. This is kind of like they're together, and the the worry increase in both suicidal kind of ideation as well as people actually committing. But it's not just that, right? The depression rates and everything else. And here, I think what is a more interesting kind of question, because oftentimes technology then becomes this vehicle for us projecting kind of like the worst of our fears, and therefore we ignore maybe actions that we need to take on our own as a society generally. Because at the same time that we have seen these kind of shifts in terms of technological patterns, social media and everything else, others have also pointed out, we've also seen important shifts in terms of religiosity, in terms of stability of the workforce, in terms of stability of family, generally speaking. And so I think the picture is actually a little bit more complicated. And the reason I keep on talking about the global north versus the global south is that those patterns are not the same in both regions. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that while we need to address the technological part of this, that in fact there is obviously there's a relationship, there's a correlation between one and the other. I'm not sure that the causal mechanism is exactly the same. And that I think that there are issues there related to family stability, to religiosity, to even just economic stability that may actually, or even economic conditions generally speaking, right? Well-being that may actually distract us from more fundamental issues. The reason I emphasize this is because even when we talk about the issue of AI, we can solve, for example, concerns through legislation. As I mentioned, the EU is doing, Greece is pioneering this, even Meta, right? Social media companies are also themselves initiating a lot of these kind of like age verification kind of standards. I think there's a teen account now for Instagram, and others will be rolled out. But I don't think that's enough. Because one of the things I did not actually mention in my notes, and this I just want to take advantage of what Professor Wilcox was kind of pointing out about the impact of AI on the workforce. There's also an impact of AI on religion as well, and faith. And what we find is that as more people kind of engage with AI, or the more they actually use AI to substitute also religious worship, the more they're actually likely to kind of distance and move away from traditional religious kind of like affiliations and just faith, generally speaking. And to the degree that I believe, at least, that faith is a grounding kind of mechanism for all of us, for both family and broad societal stability, I think that if we ignore these other elements, either work stability or the faith dimension of our societal kind of interactions, then just addressing technology or just addressing social media, just addressing smartphones is just not going to be enough. Because again, there are these very distinct patterns, at least that I'm seeing, between the global north and global south. Jonathan Haidt himself is very clear that much of what he sees is in the global north. And I wish that actually studies would actually go a little bit more into the global south and see, in fact, that those patterns that they're there. I don't see those patterns there. So there's got to be something else that's at play there beyond just social media. Maybe others may have other insights, but I think that's probably what I'm saying on that.
Thank you, Professor Mema. I'd like to turn to Dr. Ricciuti for a question. A big part of this event, Dr. Ricciuti, is helping, and you've done a healthy amount of research on the economic dynamics of families, single-parent families, and the economic uncertainties they face and how they can navigate them. What does your research say about those uncertainties and what some of the ways that families experiencing some of these economic disruptions from single parenting or other economic factors, how they can navigate them to be in a better place?
Yeah, it's a great question. There was I think where some of my research is relevant is kind of trying to get at this question of, well, why is family formation important? Like, why is marriage important? Why should we care about whether AI or social media is, making some of these dynamics more challenging? And so some of my research, what I've looked at, is trying to identify the underlying causes of kind of economic instability or poverty. And there's this concept that we have called the success sequence. And actually, Brad has done a great amount of research on this. And so he has focused on the success sequence as kind of a value concept. And basically, it's if a young person, gets a high school diploma, works full time, and gets married before they have kids, they're much more likely to have success. And success meaning, we've quantified that by looking at poverty rates, and the poverty rates are, very low, less than 2%, I believe, with various cohorts of people. So it's really kind of identifying, a pathway to avoid poverty as an adult. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a look at, what do those concepts mean? What can those concepts mean for people who maybe didn't necessarily follow that pathway? So in the US, we have this longitudinal survey that was started in the late 1990s called the Fragile Families Study. It was started in the late 1990s because that's when welfare reform happened, which was a transformation in how the US provided cash assistance to mostly low-income single mothers. And so this survey surveyed women giving birth in urban hospitals in the U.S. So it's an urban cohort, but it oversampled unmarried mothers. And so what I did is I was able to look at those unmarried births, and then the survey tracked those babies from when they were born to age 1, age 3, age 5, and age 9. And then also age 15. And so I looked across time, just trying to quantify, because these women were unmarried when they were born, what happened to them over time in 3 dimensions: education, marriage, and employment. And then I looked at how that affected, or I should say, because this was descriptive, looked at poverty rates based on those characteristics. And perhaps not surprisingly, I found a great deal of instability in these families. Initially, at birth, there's very high levels of poverty. About half of these unmarried mothers were in poverty. Also, high levels of relationship instability. Even though half of these unmarried mothers were cohabitating with the baby's father at birth, those relationships broke down pretty rapidly over time. Even by age 15, about 17% were married to the baby's father, the father of the baby that was in the survey. But the vast majority of the relationships that did not end in marriage fell apart. And not only did those relationships with the biological parent fall apart, but there were multiple relationships with other people over time that I was able to track through this survey. One bright spot was that education gains were pretty dramatic for these women over time, as well as employment gains once these children became school age. But on their own, the education gains and employment gains did not necessarily correlate to dramatically lower poverty. What I found is that the dramatic decline, again, just descriptive, but the dramatic decline in poverty rates happened when all 3, marriage, employment, and education, were combined. So I think what that shows us is that these kind of more traditional values or concepts of marriage, education, and employment remain crucial. And so things that are happening that are disrupting those patterns, or in some way making those kind of values less achievable for young people, I think will continue to be at the detriment to families, and will make it much harder for them to get ahead, both economically and socially.
Thank you, Dr. Rashidi. I have a question for Professor Rizzoli. You talked about some of the economic effects that that the low fertility rates have brought over the years in the Italian economy. I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate on how the economic uncertainty have affected family cohesion and stability, and vice versa, how family cohesion and can affect economic outcomes while family is at large. And if you can take also a minute to talk about what strategies have you seen families have taken to cope with financial challenges.
It's a very interesting question, and I particularly like the vice versa that you introduced in the middle, that poses that, I mean, of course, there is a relation between economic factors, economic stability, and family resilience, family formation. The nexus between the two things can go both ways. So to start with, your question was asking me whether economic instability affects family outcomes in general terms. Well, yes, sure. I mean, especially family formation. I mean, Italy is a place where unemployment rates among young adults is relatively high. It's going down, fortunately, but it's been high for many, many years. Young adults tend to stay home too long, or at least as compared to other peer countries. House prices are relatively high, especially in large cities. All these factors, of course, delay family formation. All these factors, I mean, I mentioned before the focus group, and I mean, all these factors are mentioned by young adults when they claim, or when they describe the challenges they face when they think about having kids. So in more general terms, when they think about having families. So certainly, yes, economic factors affect family formation and family stability. Of course, generally speaking, family stability, economic shocks are one of the several stressors for family stabilities. Typically, I mean, we know that unemployment can be a very high stressor for family stability, but also positive economic shocks can be stressors. We have evidence, for instance, that during the dot-com bubble quite a few years ago, but in those areas where there were people becoming very rich very rapidly because of the bubble, divorce rates were going up very quickly as well. So it seems like, so this direction of the causality works. But I would like also to mention the other ones, since you asked me about the vice versa. Family stability, family in general, family is a great tool to shield individuals from economic instability. I mean, the family is the primary insurance people have against the odds of life. Okay, when one of the spouses gets sick, the other jump in. When one of the spouses get unemployed, the other doubles the effort, and so on. So it's very intuitive, and all the data show that this insurance effect of the family is there, and it's very powerful. Flip side of this, we see, so it's not only, I mean, the family does not only do good for the individuals, as Professor Wilcox teaches us, but it also does good for the economic as a whole. And we see it, there was this publication that published by a UK organization until a few years ago. It was the the costs of family breakdown report or something like that. So they were looking at the public expenditures of the UK government, looking for all the items where that would be affected by family breakdown. So when with a family breakdown, the state has to pay more in terms of tax breaks for lone parents, all sorts of tax breaks, foster care, increased costs of juvenile crime, increased costs of, the dropouts rates goes up. So there are all sorts of expenditures that are already visible directly into the public expenditures. So they were actually making a report and reporting annually this. And I think it was, maybe not really scientific, but it was a very interesting exercise to do because it shows us exactly what you were pointing out. So family produce a lot of economic benefits also for society as a whole, and we see it exactly when the family stop working. We see a lot of things going wrong also in terms of public expansion when this happens.
Thank you, Professor Rizzoli. I'd like to turn to Professor Wilcox for a question. You've addressed really well the issue of AI disrupting the possibility of disrupting families through the impacts on the job market. And at the same time, you're in a world that is moving towards economically, certainly more adoption of AI tools in employment and business and a lot of areas of life. And in some ways, those being beneficial for a variety of areas of life. So the question I had with that as background is, what's the right balance between, embracing the benefits of AI while protecting against some of the potential harms it can do to families and specifically kind of the working class families you addressed as being on maybe the short end of that stick?
Yeah, great question, Derek. So I think that, again, the challenge here is recognizing that, technology is always kind of changing our economy. And, we don't want to go back to a world, for instance, where we're just relying upon, farmers to be the dominant labor force for our economy. We had an industrial revolution. We're having now, a newer AI revolution. And so I think the challenge is, how can we kind of navigate this new moment that we're living in a way that is, I think, maybe trying to take some of these changes down a little bit in their pacing, basically. And so one of the things that we also found, and I mentioned, we're doing this report on working class men and the family, and we found, much to my surprise anyways, that when you look at the private sector, looking at working class men who don't have a college degree, besides military guys and first responders, are actually at the top when it comes to marriage and family life, which is interesting, for guys who don't have college degrees. When you look at the private sector, the number one sort of part of the working class male economy in the private sector, in terms of its link to marriage and family formation, is trucking. So what that means is that truckers, Derek, are in the US anyways, the guys in the working class world who have the highest rates of marriage and family formation. And obviously the relevance here is that we're worried about the way in which, automated trucking, will displace all these guys who are now truckers. And so I think as we think about kind of how to handle this newer technology and self-driving trucks, as it's going to come, obviously, I think, is just to try to think about maybe ways to just slow down, Derek, the pace at which we are rolling out automated trucks, kind of recognizing there's this huge, sector of employment that's linked to, better families across the US. And so that would be kind of one of our recommendations for kind of how we think about, the intersection between AI and our new economy. At the same time, I think we have to be looking to ways in which we can kind of recognize that with the rise of AI, there are going to be real strong needs in the economy for new work around, data centers and also power generation. AI uses a tremendous amount of technology and power. And so we think there's actually an opportunity here to generate new jobs for working class Americans, especially working class men, when it comes to kind of construction and power generation. And so trying to think about ways to, um, inaugurate new projects that will provide, on the one hand, good paying work and good jobs to a whole swath of guys, you know, primarily working in the space of providing, the newer resources that are going to be required to power this AI, sector as well. And I think too about housing for them as well. I mean, we have seen, evidence from Melissa Kearney of The Economist kind of telling us that when we saw kind of like men being employed for fracking in kind of temporary housing, but there was no increase in marriage. I think in part because they were kind of in temporary, housing wasn't conducive to starting a family. So I think as we think about kind of newer job opportunities associated with the rise of the AI economy, thinking too about how we can kind of gear our housing policy to really create, newer towns, newer developments that would be conducive not just to kind of housing, working class Americans who are doing jobs in this new sector, but also giving them housing options that are conducive to forming families, married families as well.
Thank you, Professor Wilcox. I would like to stay with you for a second because you mentioned one of the underlying theme of your remarks had to do with low remuneration as one of the impacting factors. And now you mentioned housing. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the research from the Institute of Family Studies about the impact of housing costs on the stability of families. And while you're at it, what should policymakers do to support families experiences these hardships and uncertainty because of the rising housing costs?
Yes, thank you, Francesco. So my colleague, Lyman Stone, was a co-author on a new report on housing and family formation. And in their survey work in connection with this report, what they're finding in this new research is that housing costs are the second most common self-reported economic factor that are influencing family decisions around, things like having kids. And this is particularly concerning for us here in the US because we've seen a sort of a sharp decline in home ownership among young adults since the 1980s from about 50% to 30%. We're also seeing kind of that housing is relatively more expensive for young adults. So the price to median income ratio, for instance, for young men and women, which is like how many years of work they have to work to pay off a home, has more than tripled since 1969. So what we're seeing is that in 1969, for instance, over 97% of housing markets across the US were affordable, while in 2018 and 22, just 41% were affordable. Or to put it a different way, over a third of housing markets that we're seeing across the US have had major affordability issues in recent years. So there's just a big concern when it comes to this issue of housing in the US. And we think kind of, really two big ways to handle this from a policy perspective. One is to kind of address the supply issue here. So we have, I think, guests, Derek is coming in from Utah, for instance. And in Utah, over 2/3 of the land in Utah is federally owned. So we support legislation that would, take a portion of current federal land, including in Utah, and turn it over for residential development, the creation of new towns, new cities that would expand the supply of housing. And we think, therefore, make housing more affordable, especially for working middle-class families, especially across the West in states like Utah. And then also when it comes to regulations, recognizing that regulations often boost the cost of building a home in immense ways. I was at an event in California not too long ago, and we had an architect and developer there, and he was saying that in California, their experience is that just the regulations that they have to navigate in California cost them about $100,000, which of course is just an incredible amount of money that they're adding on to the cost of building a home in California. So we have a number of suggestions in our new research about ways that the federal, the state, and local governments can reduce the regulations that builders have to navigate and do so in ways that would reduce the cost of building new homes. One recommendation has to do with kind of eliminating urban growth boundaries that often circle suburbs or towns or cities, and make it harder for builders to push out and to build more affordable housing. There are other ideas too in the report, but I think that just the big point here when it comes to housing is that, at least in the U.S., I assume it's probably true in many other parts of the world as well. We need to open up more land for building, particularly I think single family homes that are geared for working middle class families. And we need to reduce the regulations that make it hard to build those homes as well. And I also wanted to mention there is a good bit of evidence. It's some of it's more correlational causal, just like suggests as well that kind of building dense, high apartment buildings with many stories is not conducive to family formation and fertility. So we're really kind of encouraging policymakers and the private sector to think about new ways to build single family homes that are relatively dense, and would make it, I think, easier for, again, particularly working class and middle class families, both in the US and around the world, to, start families and have kids in ways that, that they think would be good for them.
Thank you, Brad. I want to turn back to Dr. Rizzoli. You made a lot of a commentary on low fertility happening in Italy, and of course, many countries are experiencing this, and the economic stagnation that can create through a variety of means. What is the role then of economic policy with respect to family stability? Because clearly there's a connection. And do you see any in any developed or low fertility countries there are family policies that are working to kind of help turn this tide on fertility?
So what are the family policies, or the policies we are interested in? Because I would claim that all policies are to some extent family policies, in as much as they affect the family. Even foreign policy is family policies, as long as it affects families, and it does. So what are exactly family policies when we think about them? So most of them are, tax arrangements to favor family and kids. Policies that look at in-kind policies that were mentioned before, that favor kindergartens, or arrangements for work-life balance, parental leave, and stuff like that. Okay, so these are the ones that we typically think about when we mention family policies. All of them, I would say that, the fil rouge that connects these policies, to me at least, is the intent to lower the marginal costs of having kids. I have this. So and the countries take different mixtures of these policies. So there are some countries like France that do very well on the tax policies. Some other, like the Scandinavian countries, do much better on the in-kind transfers, or family working balance. Italy does bad on most of them. But altogether, what we see is some very contradictory evidence, because there are countries that should do well, because they are very good at doing these policies, like the Scandinavian countries, which have, on the other hand, fertility rates that are, yes, they are better than Italy, but not as stellar as one might think. To the extreme that Finland has a fertility rate of 1.4, which is just a little bit above the 1.25 which we have in Italy. France, has been always pointed out as a country which very very effective family policies in the forms of the tax system they have. Even France in the very recent years have a declining fertility rate. On the other hand, the US, as typically is not considered at the frontier of family policies, at least the ones that I mentioned before, but has been doing rather well in terms of fertility rates for many, many years, even if in recent years the fertility rate have been going down in the US as well. Singapore is it's very plentiful in distributing money to families and incentivizing fertility, and yet the fertility rate in Singapore is just remarkably, unbelievably low. On the other hand, Israel, which is not, it scores low on this family policies, has a very high. So it seems so altogether. So the message with I think most of the scholars would agree on that is that it's not that they don't work. So family policies do work, but they work. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of money, a very coherent policy. It's not like you start up family policies and you get results right away. It takes a lot of years to get some results. And to me, I would claim that the approach of lowering the marginal cost of having kids is probably not enough. So it does produce some results on the margin. So if you put a lot of money for a long time, you might get some very marginal improvements in the fertility rates, but it's probably not enough. So we must be more creative. We must be more radical in our approach. I think that the approach of just lowering the marginal cost of kids shouldn't be the way forward. We have to think about how to put the family back at the center stage of society, to convince people that, building families is not just cheap, it's just the best horizon for their own life. It's not just about lowering the cost of doing so. It's just making it the best possible horizon for their life. That's very generally speaking. Maybe we can go in details, but I don't want to take too much time here.
Thank you, Professor Rizzoli. Before I ask my question to Dr. Rashidi, I just want to, I'm thinking all of you have brought very, very interesting insights, and many of you have reference to research or articles that you have written or you have came across. So I wanted just to invite you to send us links to your articles or PDFs of your material that we could attach to the report of this webinar for the benefit of those who are following us, because I think it's very valuable. Dr. Rashidi, you mentioned in your initial remarks a very interesting effect of social safety net, which is discouraging in some cases individuals or families to either create a family because that may affect certain benefits, or in certain families to even look for improving their own economic situation. For example, if my spouse finds a job, then we're going to lose certain tax benefits. So I would like you to elaborate on that. But on the in the spirit of sharing ideas or solutions, how do you see social safety nets programs can best support families to navigate economic uncertainties and not be that hindering and not have that hindering effect that you mentioned in the first place?
Good question. So I kind of heard kind of a two-part there. So just the first part on, disincentivizing kind of family formation. So most of our safety net programs are targeting families with children, and single parents are disproportionately poor. So then they disproportionately need and access those benefits. And so when they engage with those benefit programs, it can disincentivize both employment, because increased income can reduce then the availability of those benefits, but it also can disincentivize marriage, because that potential income from the second person in the family can make them not eligible for benefits. So it's kind of those dynamics that once an unmarried woman has a child, then they access that system, which is necessary, but then it can kind of discourage those behaviors. To your second question about, what can the social safety net do? I think, Professor Rizzoli kind of mentioned this, there is an economic argument to be made about declining fertility, and even, how can we encourage family formation among lower income households in the US. There's certainly an economic argument to be made that if there were just more resources available, that would make it easier to form families and to have children. But I think that also can't be our only focus, because I definitely agree with Professor Rizzoli that it's more of in my view, largely a societal shift in just how we value families, how we as women value motherhood over careers. And I think that kind of the value of motherhood has declined over time. And as a woman, we're seen as more successful when we have successful careers versus, having and raising children. And so that's a harder issue to kind of tackle, and I think that's often why we do turn to the economic argument, because from a policy perspective, that's much easier to address. We can design a program for that. We can say, oh, we're going to create this program, paid leave, or, transfer more income or give a tax credit. It's that societal shift that I think is much harder, and obviously has evolved over time, over the past several decades. So I think that we do, though, need to shift to how do we address those issues, and how do we really address the underlying issues related to how men and women, but women in particular, how they view their lives, and what values they gain from both work and family formation.
Thank you, Dr. Ricciuti. I want to turn for one last moderator question before we get to audience questions to Professor Mema. And this is going to be a multi-part question. Professor Mema, I noticed you put your digital hand up, as it were, when Brad Wilcox was addressing this question on balancing of AI kind of benefits and protecting families. So I'd like you first to comment on that. But secondarily, or additionally, you talked about how AI is shaping kind of the information space and reality for families and what they're seeing through algorithms and things on social media. How do you think that's transforming or impacting family interactions, between a parent and a child, or between children? And what measures are there that families can take to kind of manage those impacts on their families?
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you for giving me that opportunity to address. Just a couple. I agree on the whole with everything that's been said here. There's a couple of cautions that I want to kind of point out. One, we do tend to have this technological deterministic kind of way of thinking, right? AI is here, the train has left the station, and it's one way, and there's no way but can bring it back. And on the whole, that argument is true. I mean, technology is always moving forward, and we're always becoming more and more technological. But the kind of technology, the values that are infused within the technology, I think are not necessarily already determined. That debate is already being had right now. And so even though I consider myself a technological optimist, kind of that sense, I don't think that we need to surrender our agency, our ability to shape the way this technology is done. And I think Professor Wilcox aptly said that we just slow this down. I don't think slowing down is just enough. I think we need to change the nature of the technology itself altogether. We need to change the value set of the technology. We need to change the way we engage with that, the way we regulate it. And again, that's that word there, regulation, again, that maybe may be problematic for some people. And it is not clear to me that the alternative is necessarily a much better one. Consider for a second, I think Dr. Valerie Hudson, has done a lot of work here on the impact of, and it probably would have been better than myself, or perhaps in this conversation, in the impact that demographics and but also global security and also climate change or environmental kind of insecurity is affecting family formation, the decision when to have families, but also when to have children or to have children at all. And so when we think about the impact that AI may have in terms of, opening up this kind of like this new space for economic growth as a result of this new age of AI, the fourth industrial revolution, I think we need to be careful with that. Because we do know, for example, there are 2 or 3 or 4 different kind of like side effects when we think about AI in terms of, just the chips industry, right? Just building a computer, by the way, that we're communicating on requires about 800 grams of kilograms, about almost a ton of kind of material that is beyond what you are actually producing. Getting rare earth minerals is required for the microchips and everything else. The outcome, the environmental cost of that is so high that can actually have huge consequences in actually the very same families that we're trying to help. The concept of data sovereignty and data centers in Mexico, farmers are foregoing irrigation and irrigating their crops so they can actually use that to cool data centers and to actually later on train AI models. So how's that going to impact family stability in those Mexican farms, in those Mexican villages, when we are like investing wholesale on AI without thinking about these other consequences? So yes, deregulate. Yes, let's embrace the opportunity, but let's be cautious about that because I think there are consequences to that. There are consequences with regards to global security, or rather increases in global insecurity. And we know this because the chips war, the ongoing conversations are happening between the United States and China and everywhere else. And that, of course, has an impact in a couple's ability and decision when to get married and whether to have children or not in this world. And so I think that is an important, I think, part of the conversation. I think we need to have all of that. I need to keep that in mind as we discuss the opportunities and possibilities that are before us when it comes to this AI economy. Again, I'm a technological optimist. I want to embrace it. I want to take advantage of it. But at the same time, let's be careful about the kinds of consequences that doing so may have on us, both in terms of increased global insecurity and increased environmental insecurity, environmental degradation, the direct impact that those things can have on the very same families and same family stability that we're trying to actually protect and try to provide for or try to advocate for. And I agree here, I think, with Professor Rashid and Rizzoli that the economic part of that is not the only part of that. And of course, technology can play a role here, and that's an important one. Now, in terms of mental health implications, I said this in the first part. Let me kind of recap. There's increased anxiety, depression, excessive screen time, particularly social media use has been linked to a higher level of anxiety, depression, loneliness, especially among children and adolescents. There's, of course, reduced attention spans, constant notification, digital multitasking. Again, we don't have to look at children, look at ourselves. Can make it harder for individuals to focus, engage in deep and meaningful interactions. Sleep disruptions can affect productivity also in the workforce. The blue light from screens can interfere, of course, with melatonin production, leading to sleep deprivation, which in turn, of course, affects mood and overall well-being. And of course, we have tech addictions and dopamine effects that comes as a result of this social media now enabled and steroids with AI. So the design of social media and gaming platforms encourages compulsive use, leading to addictive behaviors that can, of course, negatively impact mental health. Now, what are the implications for our relationships? Well, reduce face-to-face interaction. Overuse of technology can reduce the quality of in-person interactions, weakening, as I mentioned earlier, emotional connections between family members. There are parental challenges because of the digital divide, right? Parents struggle to set boundaries. I'm struggling with this right now with my children, trying to understand, right, between my responsibility to provide for the family economically, but at the same time making sure that, of course, their access to technology is safe and also judicious. And so we need to set boundaries for technology use, leading to conflicts over screen time. Additional generational gaps here in tech understandings can create barriers, disruptions in family time, a lack of connectivity, like I said earlier about that. So what can we do? Well, set boundaries as one of those things. So we need to establish, I think, tech-free zones, both within the house, but also in terms of times. No devices during meals or before bedtime can actually foster healthier interactions. And by the way, younger generations understand this better. My 16-year-old is really good at this. And I can't reach him at certain times because he has locked away his phone. And I think those people, they actually understanding this a little bit more than even we are understanding it. Encouraging digital literacy. We haven't spoken about this at all. This is very, very important. We must teach family members about responsible technology use, privacy concerns, media literacy. Back in November 2022, when ChatGPT blew up, I've been tracking this for 2 years because of my work with in Japan at the time and with a podcast. So we've been tracking what ChatGPT been doing with previous ones. But you remember the famous New York Times article. We read that interaction, that conversation in our family, and we start talking about all the different things that were happening and trying to educate our family in this. Promoting offline activities. This is one that we can do better. And I think it's part of the answer to my question earlier, why so much of this is happening in the global north rather than global south. And much of it has to do with offline activities, the availability of them, unstructured playtime, away from screens with your neighborhood kids and everybody else. I had the opportunity to I grew up like that. And so I can understand, I think, the value of something like this. Let me just kind of, because this is sponsored by the LDS Church, and maybe it's something to say about this. Karl Barth's theology here of relationality has been very fundamental to my understanding. I'll talk more about this, Francesco, next week. And Noreen Hertzfeld has written a fantastic book called The Artifice of Intelligence. And in it, she points out to the fact that AI lacks, because of its lack of embodiment, because of lack of relationality, it cannot, as we replace physical interactions with technological interactions, we are also doing away with relationality, right? We're doing away with embodiment. And as we move away from this physical aspect of it, which is at the essence of who we are relational as human beings, and we are embodied as human beings. That also will inevitably affect us mentally, spiritually, and physically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mema. This has been a very fascinating dialogue with you and exchange with all of you. Now, in the few minutes that we have left, we'll open for your questions, and we already have a few in our Q&A box. And I think we'll have time to just address maybe 2-3 questions before closing. But let me start from Lisa Perkins. She has questions basically for everybody, and let's start with the question for Professor Rizzoli. She's asking, what is the general perception of the population decline in Italian government and among the general populations? Do you see any policies trying to address this issue? And if yes, what kind? If no, do you know why that may be?
So the short answer to the question is no. I don't see neither acknowledging the seriousness of the stuff, neither doing something serious about it. There is a new government for a couple of years now that at least is not afraid of speaking about the family, which was the case. I mean, family has always been a politically contentious issue for some reason. It was not a theme that united the country, maybe, I don't know, reminiscent of a very distant past with the fascist regime making policies for pronatalist policies, but it's 8 years ago at least. But so family was like a taboo in the discourse for many years. At least now there's we talk a little bit more about it, but the government is not making the money where the mouth is. And I have, and a very intuitive reason why this is the case. Of course, we are in a democratic trap, by which I mean that, it doesn't pay to put money on family issues because children simply don't vote. It's much more, there's much higher returns, put the very little money that is available on pensions. And if you just witness our electoral campaigns, it's full of politicians discussing about pensions or policies that affect disproportionately positively the older people, because that's where the votes are. I mean, you won't find a politician saying anything against the family, but when it comes to the time to put the money, well, that's zero. Yeah, so I don't win on that time. I would like to talk about proxy voting for children, but that's maybe for another time.
Thank you. Thank you. And for Professor Wilcox, this is again from a Danish perspective. In Denmark right now, there's a big push for men to work more part-time instead of women in the name of equality and feminism. Do you think this will impact marriage? I'm curious what lies behind those studies that you mentioned. Is it culture, in your opinion, or male-female psychology? Any thoughts on how it might impact families if we heavily incentivize men to work part-time?
Great question from your Danish guest here on this webinar. Yeah, there's a book by David Gilmour, anthropologist, looking at kind of cross-cultural patterns when it comes to men's roles and kind of family life in many different contexts. And what Professor Gilmour found in his work was that it was a kind of pretty common pattern across many, not every, but many different cultural contexts, to kind of expect men to provide a distinctive contribution to their families, in what would in most contexts be kind of financially. And this was partly, I think, a consequence of the fact that when women have kids, young children especially, they tend to be the primary caretaker for infants and toddlers. And this is not an American pattern. It's not a Danish pattern. It's not, it's a kind of universal pattern that we see across cultural contexts. And so Gilmour kind of argues, as a consequence of looking at this sort of cross-cultural pattern, that, that most cultures have kind of basically encouraged men to play an important and distinctive role when it comes to providing for the families. Now, obviously, as kids get older and, they're in school and things like that, there can be, obviously, more flexibility. And we obviously do have, situations, now where dads are stay-at-home caretakers. But I think, and there's going to be obviously lots of variations, right? But I think that in general, on average, families are more likely to flourish, when they have young children, especially babies and toddlers, to have kind of more of an expectation that, that men will sort of step up and provide for their families financially, to kind of give their wives the freedom to, make choices about caring for their young kids in ways that they think are best. So I would not be, supportive of this particular Danish measure. I don't think it's really one that's attentive to the way in which, again, in most cultural contexts, women tend to focus on caring for babies and toddlers, and therefore kind of men are playing a distinctive and important role in helping to provide financially for their families in that unique developmental stage of family life.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one final audience question. We're going to take the one from Kimberly Wilkerson that is directed towards Dr. Ricciuti. Dr. Ricciuti, Kimberly cites data on service and volunteering in communities, and how that when people receive assistance, give back, outcomes improve, and things like independence and autonomy. So the question is, what discussions or actions are being taken around this idea of possibly requesting or even requiring service or volunteer kind of giving back of those who receive assistance from safety net programs?
It's a good question. I think you're referring to kind of the idea of work requirements in certain programs, which I think some people view those as, a way to give back to your community, a service requirement, but kind of a social contract with government programs. So if government provides assistance, then the individual has a responsibility for that. I think that there is a strong argument to be made that that is an appropriate approach and that social contract is important. And I think in some circles that's very much part of the discussion. I think the difficulty is that there's other circles that feel that that actually is not the that's not how they think of that kind of a requirement. They think of a requirement as some sort of a punishment rather than seeing the value that can be added through that kind of a social contract and that kind of arrangement. And so to directly answer your question, yes, it's certainly part of the discussion. And I think exactly the way you framed it in your question. But again, the challenge is that not everybody sees it as that kind of a reciprocal relationship.
Thank you, Dr. Ricciuti. Thank you to all the panelists. I want to offer a few closing remarks before we wrap up today. There's been a lot of insights offered on how families can navigate economic uncertainties, technological changes, and culture shifts. A few of note that I kind of am taking away from this, want to add to the discussion in conclusion, from Professor Mema, understanding the nuances of dealing with technological disruption of family relationships in different parts of the world, and the need for holistic approaches that get to more than just the technological aspect of things. From Dr. Ricciuti, the importance of education, work, and marriage in helping families protect against economic disruptions, particularly single parent families. From Professor Rizzoli, one of the key comments I think from this webinar is that all policies have impacts on families. All policies are family policies to an extent. And I think as someone who works in the policy space, what that means is if we're not recognizing and looking and analyzing policy ideas or policies on the books from the standpoint of their impact on families, if we're only looking at it from individual, business, and government standpoints, we're probably missing some of the important insights of what the best policy is going to be, or what the impacts of policies are going to be. And then Professor Wilcox, noting the need to to embrace some of the job opportunities particularly for working class families that are coming up as we shift more to AI, and in particular areas like energy, where there's a lot of government regulation that perhaps we need to look at how we expand those opportunities as we shift to AI for the sake of working class families, rather than kind of sticking to status quo approaches to regulation on those kinds of areas. So with that, I again want to thank everyone, Professor Mema, Professor Wilcox, Professor Rizzoli, and Dr. Ricciuti for joining us today. Thank you to all the audience members who submitted questions. And for some final remarks about a future webinar in this series, back to Francesco.
Thank you, Derek, for your summary and of the great wealth of information and knowledge that was shared today by our panel. Thank you also to all those who stayed with us throughout this episode. This is a very ambitious program that our office, the European Union International Affairs Office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, together with Sutherland Institute, have put together to address family issues from a policy point of view. This first episode will be followed by our second next month, titled Addressing Family Fears, Community Voices on Building Stronger Families. And we will look at similar topics that we discussed here, however, from contributions from civil society, faith, and community leaders that offer ongoing and daily first-hand support and advocacy on the ground. Later in June, we will have another webinar, this time hosting policymakers. So we will look at these topics from a policy point of view. And in between, both Sutherland and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have planned other opportunities to meet and engage with policymakers and family advocates to address these very timely issues. Again, we invite you to stay in touch with us, to follow our social media pages. We will share the report of this webinar as well as those that will follow. And once again, on behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Sutherland Institute, thank you very much to our wonderful speakers today and to all of you that have joined us from both sides of the Atlantic. All the best, and we'll see you next month.